On today's episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored, Dr. Roddy Raban, board-certified plastic surgeon coming to you right from the middle of Beverly Hills, the mecca of makeovers, is going to discuss Botox, fillers, and day spas, oh my, how you can get exactly what you need. Because let's face it, a procedure is not the same as a mani-pedi. We're going to talk about, I don't want to say quick fixes, but we're going to talk about Botox and fillers. But on this new sort of landscape of plastic surgery becoming accessible, attainable, all over the place, as you say, demystified, but more complicated in some ways, I'm a little concerned about the rise of the med spa. And I feel like that's something that we really have to talk about, because people can go to these places for Botox and fillers, but I feel like more and more there's a blurring of the lines. People treat these things like a hair salon, and yet they're going in for very serious procedures that can have problems.
No, you said it excellent. And the problem we have with everything is, as things become more available and things become more accessible, on one side, it's great because now the masses have access to things that, say, perhaps 10, 15 years ago were maybe reserved for celebrities and or the elite. So that's wonderful. To have access to things that maybe you didn't have access to is a great advantage of the demystification and also the widespread availability. On the flip side, there's a huge issue with under-regulation, and essentially it's become sort of like the Wild Wild West. It's kind of like the gold rush, because like as is sort of happening now with the pot industry, which is now the gates have been opened, and God knows, and it'll be a while before they get it regulated. The same is true of I want to call this a non-surgical world. Surgeons already have issues, as we were talking about, with plastic surgeons, cosmetic surgeons, and oculoplasty, board certified. So that's a whole mishmash. Now we got this whole other world, and the problem with this whole other world is that people don't take it that seriously. So, Botox, fillers, I'm just going in and getting a little Ultherapy. I'm just going to freeze my fat. All of these things seem so minor, yet they're not. And the end result of it is you got a lot of weird looking people, So all this, what it's doing, it's actually bad for the industry, because you have all these, can't tell you the number of times I've had people come in and like, wait, I don't want to look like that crazy lady at the party. So you're creating all these monster looking people.
I always just yell, Lara Flynn Boyle.
Yeah. Second thing is you are taking a lot of people's hard-earned money without producing the results that you are supposed to. And you're basically, it's quackery. A lot of this is quackery. It's like selling snake oil. So I don't know, and the last part of this is that, as I said to you before, is people are assuming incorrectly that there is an overriding governmental agency or someone monitoring this. In other words, if a spa exists and there's someone in it and they're injecting you, someone has checked these people out. You follow what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But what do you mean? They have a license, right? And they have the degree. And the problem is the world of non-surgical interventions is much more lenient than the world of surgical interventions.
Which sounds pretty lenient to some degree.
Correct. So as a result, this is the problem we're running into. So we have people that aren't trained doing things. We have people doing things that aren't legal. We have people, we only hear about the egregious things like, oh, did you hear about that woman injecting cement in so-and-so's butt?
People died.
Yeah, but that's like, I'm not even talking about those crazy cases. I'm talking about here in Beverly Hills, in Brentwood, Santa Monica, Hollywood, New York, places like that. There are all kinds of spas, which is an umbrella term, where individuals are practicing medicine, in my estimation, without really much supervision or training.
Well, it feels like everybody's, sort of jumping in the pretty pond because there's money to be made.
100%.
So when you're talking day spa, med spa, these terms are interchangeable. They don't really mean anything, do they?
No, it's a beauty destination. Okay. And the problem is that when you go to these places, your guards are down. You don't ask a lot of questions. You said you've been to them, right?
I have several.
So and as have and I'm sure of the people listening, 50% of the people who get stuff have gotten stuff done, if not more. So the question is, let me ask you something. Who injected you?
A nurse.
Okay, it's fine. Where was she trained?
I don't know.
Who trained her?
Not sure.
How long has she been training?
Didn't know.
What did she inject you with?
That I know.
What did she inject you with?
Botox once. Diasport, I think, is one of them.
Uh-huh.
And what's the other one that's by Allergan that everybody gets? It's
Juvederm.
That's the guy.
Did you see her open up the syringe in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. So the problem is people go to places and they're always very pretty. They always smell
That's
really
true.
good.
That's true.
And they always have amazing reviews online, which
and
we
free
all,
coffee.
We all, oh, well, there you have
They
it.
always have the cure.
And then they all have amazing reviews online, which we know are self-fabricated.
Now we do.
And then the question then becomes is, okay, so let me tell you the laws so you understand. At least
Okay,
in
like
California.
who's running the ship?
At least in California.
In California.
Okay. In order for a spa to exist, it needs to be run by a medical director.
And what does their training need to be?
They just need to be a doctor. So literally.
Well, you say it just need to be. I bet some of these places don't have.
No, they'll have a medical doctor on documentation. So what'll happen?
Oh.
You mean a pediatrician can be the medical? Yup. As long as there is a physician, a licensed physician supervising, and that's the big word, nurses can inject under the supervision of doctors. So let me tell you where all the pitfalls start.
Okay.
Number one, the physician that is so-called the medical director many times doesn't know anything about cosmetic surgery. They're just some guy. So the medical spa is owned by a business owner.
Okay.
They hire a physician to sort of qualify for the paperwork. And in reality, that person isn't there. Because technically, why is the law in place? Because they need to protect the patient. So there needs to be a medical director. They're directing.
Are they supposed to be there in the building?
Yes. So they're all the nurses who inject the patients must have run the patients by a physician prior to administering any treatment. In other words, the doctor needs to be the one that approves the patients to get the treatments that the nurses do.
So technically, he should be somewhere on the premises
Or
in an office.
He needs to be within reach and availability to discuss the case. So the problem that you run into is that's one issue. So that isn't happening. The biggest issue, that isn't even the biggest issue, believe it or not. The biggest issue is who trained the nurse? You want to say, oh, you're Dr. Bond, you're a plastic surgeon. You Google me, you'll see I went to 6 years of plastic surgery training, it's visible. The nurse has got what, a certificate from Allergan? Who trained her? How long has she been trained? And the problem is there is very little regulation. So the question then one asks is, so what's the big deal? So what, you got big lips? No, the problem is if you inject the wrong place, I'll give you an example. If you inject the wrong place, you could, for example, lose the tip of your nose. It's not and again, this is not one of those 1 in a million cases. This happens a lot meaning enough, where it's something that you need to be very careful. If you inject the artery with a filler in the wrong place, you can lose necrosis or gangrene of your nose. You can go blind.
Wow.
So those are all some really big consequences. You don't have that issue when getting your nails done. So why are the two interchangeable?
Well, when now my mind is like, when you have the doctor on premise, technically before the nurse does anything, they're supposed to kind of run back and say, hey, look, I'm thinking of doing this, this, and this.
Correct.
To patient in room 1. She's going to get some filler.
Correct.
And some Botox on the forehead. Yeah.
Right.
I don't think that happens all the time.
No. So I'll give you an example. So I'll give you a perfect example. Me, myself, I've been in practice almost 15 years. I have always done all of my own injections, all my fillers, all my Botox. In the last year, after great contemplation, I finally decided, you know what? I will bring in an assistant in to help me. So with great reluctancy, I hired a nurse. But listen here, this is the key element. She trained under me for 5 months. Literally, I taught her every nuance about patient care. I am the one that trained her. So what I'm trying to say is it's not that it's a nurse and it's a doctor. It's the training that is lacking. So they're just not trained, all of them, and you have no way of certifying it, and there's no homogeny in it. It's just everyone's random. So every time you go in, there's a risk that the person is untrained.
So, if you will, back in the day, whenever somebody needed dental work, they would say, oh, go to the dental school and let the students work on you for, free or cheap or whatever. That was like a thing people did. I think they still do it. But there's really no process like that in the world that we live in now. In other words, There's no, hey, go to the injectable school and let the students practice on you. Like, you may be at the injectable school and not even know it.
Right. Well, listen, the reality is the nurse who is doing injections she has to figure out how to get going. So there are, if I want to be a plastic surgeon, there's one route. Plastic surgeon, not cosmetic surgeon.
Right.
Plastic surgeon, one route. I go to plastic surgery residency.
Correct.
If I want to be an cosmetic injectable nurse injector, it can be a weekend course. It could be like with the girl with me, intensive training. So the problem is there's many routes and none of them are being discussed and or they're not transparent about it. So that's another. Then the other issue is, so that's the issue of the administrator.
So if you have a complication, let's just go there. Let's suppose somebody's nose gets a problem. Who do you go to?
Well, the nurse has to go to the doctor,
the
doctor who is supposedly supervising or overriding them, and then you're sort of taken care of by both of them.
So potentially a pediatrician who knows nothing of what he's been signing off on can be looking at the tip of your blackened nose, saying, "I don't know what to do."
Correct.
Oh,
no,
okay,
it's possible, and it's not that far fetched.
Well, and also these day spas they promise what I like to call red carpet ready. Like, you have a big event, you have a wedding coming, come get some CoolSculpt or do this or do that. And now you're saying that these are real procedures that people are supposed to be overseeing. Now, what exactly are these? You're saying practicing medicine. CoolSculpt. What is CoolSculpt?
So I think one of the other issues. So listen, this show is not about med spas are bad.
No, I get that, but now I'm like,
the show is about be cautious and know what you're doing.
Okay.
So all we want to do is make people knowledgeable about what the issues are. So the one issue with a med spa is that the director may not be overseeing the injectors. The second part with a med spa is that you have greatly varying degrees of training of the injectors. The third part of the med spa is that the procedures that they provide, many of them are quasi-effective. So the problem I have in general with the whole non-surgical world is if you come in my office, and I've been in practice for almost 15 years, you ask me, do you have X, Y, and Z machine? No. How about this laser? No. What about, well, why not? Don't you want to make money? Because I don't necessarily feel that the results of these machines, and there are thousands of them, are up to par to validate the exchange and the money. So yes, I have, for example, CoolSculpting. Why? Because that's one of two machines that I have that I researched the hell out of, because for what they say they do, they're going to do it. So another big problem is that patients are going to these spas, and it happens in doctors' offices too. We just happen to be discussing spas, and they're getting treatments done that promise you a lot of things. Wrinkles will disappear. Skin will tighten. Discolorations will go away. And the reality is that when you look at the before and after results, because I do photography, many of them are manipulated by low lighting, high lighting, meaning flash photography, different positioning. I mean, I can show you right now, they can't see me, but right now I need a neck lift. And right now I just had the most incredible neck lift ever. And all I'm doing is changing the positioning of my chin. So when you look at these before and after results and you're giving these people your hard-earned money, hoping and praying that all of a sudden you're going to have an amazing jaw, you shouldn't be surprised when it's not there that effective, because you're looking at the results. That's why I'm big on getting the word out.
But I think I want to circle back around this, because I think women really do need to understand something like CoolSculpt isn't a manicure. There could be a complication. There could be a problem.
Yeah, listen. When you compare CoolSculpt to a facelift, of course, it's much less. And it isn't that you shouldn't get it done, and it isn't that it's super risky. It's just that there are complications. Like, for example, CoolSculpting. You can get something called paradoxical hyperplasia, which means what? Which basically is fancy for the area that you tried to freeze and shrink actually gets larger and thicker and scars. Right. The treatment for that, unfortunately, is liposuction.
It's more CoolSculpt.
Is liposuction. So, you want to be, in general, you want to be in an environment where you feel that you're in a safe place. Not for when things go well, but for when the shit hits the fan. Mm-hmm. And I think that we live in a city here in LA where there's so many providers that you don't have to go to places that are like in a mall.
No.
Why not go to a reputable dermatologist office?
I don't think people
Why not
understand.
go to a doctor's office where there is someone there and it's a legit place? Because at least there's accountability and you know that there's someone supervising it. But I think in general, these other places where it's more of a marketing scheme, I think is very risky. And I think that I just would be cautious. I just want people to be savvy. That's what I think is the key.
So one of the reason why I'm bringing this is, again, I've been to these several times, many times, over the years, many times. And I guess I want to ask a few, I'm sorry to dwell on this, but I think it's important that women know that there are doctors, actual like yourself, that do the Botox, the fillers, all of this under, I don't want to say supervision. You don't need supervision. You're the doctor. But there's a degree. That's the highest. That's the good.
Sure, that would be the gold standard, in my opinion, is like if you can put it this way, if you can get Botox by a board-certified plastic surgeon versus a nurse, which may be very talented, but you have no idea her training, and the difference in cost is $3 a unit or $4 a unit, I don't understand why you would ever do that compromise. Is it because the spa is because of convenience? I don't get it. So for me, it doesn't make any sense. And yes, everything that these, most of these things can be done in more legit places.
I think it's because women don't understand the difference. Back in the day, we didn't even talk about units. People weren't educated to that level. You went and got Botox and they charged you X amount per area.
Very good.
And now it became units. And as you're saying, as it becomes more the Wild West, people don't even know what questions to ask.
So here's a good idea. So one of the things where you're going to run into problems is the actual products being injected, right? So you're going somewhere and someone is injecting you with poison. Botulinum toxin.
Yeah.
I asked you, remember I said, did you see them open the bottle? So a big area of Botox is dilution. Oh, it's not working. Well, let me ask, or better yet, it's either not working because it's over diluted or my face is frozen. Why do you think your face is frozen? It's frozen because I make a living off of how many units I inject. So am I going to be heavy-handed or light-handed when my end revenue is connected to how much I inject? So you need, like for example, in my office, Botox is, I want to say a lost leader. In other words, it's not the way I make a living. So like you come in for 5 units, you come in for 5 units. I do something called micro Botox, which basically means I put a lot less more often versus a lot more less often. Let's say at the end of the year, you need 100 units total throughout the year. I distribute it over 3 or 4 visits, whereas most people distribute over 2 visits. So you're going to spend more or less the same amount of money, but you're going to look a lot better throughout the year. So one is too much Botox, one is dilution of Botox. Then we get into the scariest area, which is fillers. There are probably in the world 500, if not more, fillers.
Wow.
The question is, which ones are there? Hyaluronic acid, calcium hydroxide, Sculptra. We have silicone particles. We have all these things that are being injected. Do you know how many lip reductions I do a year? Do you know what a lip reduction is?
No.
That's a woman calls me from somewhere around the world and says, I had silicone injected in my lips, very common throughout the world, and now my lips are asymmetric, large. I bite my lip when I talk. I look ridiculous. I'm a 45-year-old woman now, and I should have never done it. I did it at someone's house. I was told it was going to go away. And the only way to remove this stuff is to cut it out, to cut out the lip, to actually do a lip reduction. Well, why am I doing that? I'm doing that because people are getting stuff injected in their face, and they don't know what it is.
Back in the day, people put Gore-Tex in.
Gore-Tex. Like the Gore-Tex is at least a material that you can remove. The fearful thing is that you go to places that are relatively quasi-supervised and people are opening syringes of some substance. And I promise you 90% of people don't see the substance being opened and injected. And then you're trusting this environment with your face. And then you want to know why there's all these women that look terrible or why there's all this bad. Just think about how we've set it up and then ask yourself why it happens. You got to know what the products are. So HA, hyaluronic acid products, that's the Juvederms, the Restylans. Those are my preferred products. Why? Because they have no allergic reaction because they're made of substances that we have in our body. They're reversible, meaning they go away. And rather, they're temporary, meaning they go away. And they're reversible, meaning in the worst case scenario, oh my God, look at how terrible this is. You can inject an enzyme which Vitrace, which will make it go away. Things like that are long-lasting or permanent, I think, are very dangerous. And I think that you need to use quite great caution, because if you hate it, you own it.
It's surgery. You got to get it out.
You
by
can't.
surgery.
No. I wish. A lot of them you can't get out. I can only get it out of the. I can't even get it out of the lips. I cut your lip out. I don't get the silicone out. So if you get this stuff injected under your eyes, very, very dangerous area, because you have that tear trough, that hollow.
Right.
And then you get all this funky stuff injected, and then it gets swollen, and then you get that bread loafing. How am I going to get that out?
I think in summation for me, and then we're going to talk to someone who actually worked at a med spa. In summation for me, this is what I get out of it, is that you should call and find out what I hate to say it, what the difference in price is for an injectable. And if it's you're going to get a board certified plastic surgeon can do your injectables versus it's not the kind of thing that you go on Groupon for.
Oh, it's huge on Groupon.
I know, and I see it, and that's the point that I want to make is why would you take a chance with your face? That's not the place that you bargain shop.
Listen, at the end of the day, it's not to say again and again that the nurse injector is any worse than the plastic surgeon. She may be more talented. She may have injected 50,000 people and he has injected 12. I'm simply saying do more due diligence, ask about the training, skill level, and ask about the experience of the person injecting you. That's all I'm saying. And then be cautious, because theoretically you're assuming that there's some umbrella or overriding supervisor, and there really isn't. Okay. And know what the products that you're having done are, see them, and try to be a little more critical about the procedures that are being offered to you. If it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true. That's, genuinely the truth. That's it.
Excellent. So we're wrapping up the segment on what I like to say, Botox, fillers, and med spas. Oh my. You are listening to Plastic Surgery Uncensored with Dr. Radi Raban on Revolver Podcast. On this episode of Plastic Surgery Uncensored, Dr. Raban, you have walked us through the gamut of what can go very wrong and what you should look for to make sure things go right with fillers and Botox and med spas. But we actually have on the line a young lady that worked at a med spa, and I would love to ask Julie specifically about these. The medical director thing is the one that sticks in my mind, because you're saying there's no overarching body that protects these people.
Well, there is supposed to be, but what I'm saying is in reality, it just you can't rely on anyone but yourself. That's just the safest way to go about navigating the world today, and plastic surgery is no different.
Now, Julie, thank you for being on.
I'm happy to be on here with you. Thanks.
Great. Now, at the med, was it called a med spa or a day spa?
It was a med spa.
And did it have a medical director?
It did actually. It had 2 medical directors, and then we had several other staff members as well who were doing injectables. And
what was usually the training time for the injectables?
Well, that would actually vary. It would vary. We had a couple of physician assistants who had some experience previously, and their training time was less, maybe a couple of months. And we had a couple of nurses also. One of them was actually already working there when I started, so she'd been doing injectables for about 5 years. And then we had a nurse who joined during the time that I was working, and actually she didn't train as long as she probably should have. There were some things going on in the office. And
how long was she trained?
I would say she was only trained. She'd never done any injectables before whatsoever. And she was only trained for maybe 2 months.
So can I ask you a question? Your medical directors, if I may ask you, what was their background?
One of the doctors was an MD, started out in family medicine, and did that for several years. And then he actually had gone off and was working in another facility and come back to the office after a few years. The primary medical provider was a DO, doctor of osteopathy. Again, she had started in family practice.
Right. So their background, both of them were in family. Their training originally was in family practice, correct? They weren't plastic surgeons or ENTs or dermatologists, right?
No,
right.
Not at all.
And then who trained? When you say that the training, some of the women, obviously, some of the injectors, whether they were nurses or physician assistants, excuse me, some of them were already trained. That's fine. But the ones that were brought in, and who trained them? Who's actually the one teaching them?
They were actually trained under the primary physician, the DO, and she would hand train.
And then who trained the DO? Because the DO's training was in family practice, right? So right. So the reason, you understand the logic we're asking, because at the end of the day, the question that all we want to make sure happens is that there's a safety in place for the patients. And so it's not to suggest that someone couldn't learn something, but the question one asks is who trained who then trained who? Is it the blind leading the blind, or how does that work? So do you know how that physician?
That's a great question. The only information I had about her training, she had started the med spa about 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I know she would be going to different seminars and certifications and things like that. But the only thing I knew is that she had 13 years of personal experience in doing the injecting.
Right. So then, so the question really then what it lends to, and it's not that there's anything wrong, and she might be an amazing injector, but what we were discussing here was transparency and training and certification. And the problem is that in some instances, people are really well trained, and in some instances, people are quasi-trained. And the question is, how do you know? Is it because the facility is really pretty? That doesn't mean anything. Is it because there's a bunch of good Yelp reviews? Doesn't mean anything. All it's going to take is one wrong injection, and you go blind, and that'll be the end of it. So we're just trying to, when what you're describing is quite common, that there's a lot of these spas are run by non-surgeon, dermatology based. And it's quite common, I think, that family practitioners change gears and then run a spa.
There's money to be made. And she alluded to the person who only got the 2 months training. You alluded, and I want to circle back around and ask you outright, were there problems, negative results? Did people have complaints? Did something go south?
Luckily, there wasn't anything extremely major that happened with her, but we did have several complaints about the Botox that she was injecting. People were complaining that, it wasn't effective.
Did you guys have any ptosis or eyelid droop? One of those. I mean, the thing with the reason why people get away with it, not as if they're being stealing, but get away with it is because the treatments do reverse. So you're lucky. But obviously, if you get one patient with an eyelid droop, it's a really unpleasant experience for that patient for several months. Did you guys have any of that eyelid droop?
We actually did have one patient who had a ptosis, and she did leave the practice as a patient. She didn't want to come back to the practice.
Yeah, and it can happen to the best of injectors. Don't get me wrong. What I'm just bringing up so that our listeners can understand is that, it's reversible, but I mean, I can tell you that for patients, it'll be a very unpleasant experience. And unfortunately, it is part of the learning curve, and everyone has to learn some way. It's just, again, just making sure that excellence is teaching is the really real important thing.
Great. Well, Julie, I really appreciate you being on there, because I feel like people need to know. Ask the medical director's training. Ask how they came to be part of a med spa versus, hey, I'm a DO that studied family practice and decided, I was going to take a couple of weekend injectable classes and open a spa.
Absolutely. I think that's very important. You only have one face.
Exactly. Thank you so much for being on with us.
Appreciate it.
If you loved Plastic Surgery Uncensored, and I'm sure you did, I don't even want to say if, we would love to get your feedback. If you enjoyed and found our podcast helpful, tell us why. Give us a review and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, or you can go directly to revolverpodcast.com. If you have a topic you would like us to talk about, then please reach out to us on Facebook, Roddy Raban, Instagram at Dr. Roddy Raban, or RoddyRaban.com. You are listening to Plastic Surgery Uncensored with Dr. Roddy Raban on Revolver Podcast.